I recently posted a status on my private Facebook feed asking Christian friends how they know the Gospels are reliable. Not a single person answered, but eventually one asked me what I thought of this video, which claims a preacher named Voddie proves the Bible is true. The video is full of pretty standard apologetic stuff, including the 500 witnesses argument, the number of manuscripts attesting to Jesus' life and miracles, and so on. You know, all the junk we heard rehashed for the 1,000th time in that Case for Christ movie.
We have a report of the resurrection with specific eyewitnesses.
The earliest recorded accounts tell us that Jesus was properly buried in a tomb.
There's all these accounts of actual eyewitnesses, people with zero motivation to lie.
500 separate people saw Jesus at the same time.
I decided to respond largely because there's a fair chance most of us will hear Christians repeat these arguments. And I'm doing so in a series of short videos, each of which will give my take on one of them, showing how I would debunk it using a simple, non-scholarly approach that you will hopefully find useful in everyday conversation. That said, let's get this thing rolling.
Eyewitnesses!
Well, hello to you too. Shouting eyewitnesses seems like a strange way to kick this off, but in fairness, I think somebody else edited and posted this. So please, proceed. Let's see if we can piece together the context of what you're talking about.
A reliable collection of historical documents written down by eyewitnesses, but I also said during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul says that Jesus was resurrected. After he was resurrected, he appeared to Peter. Then he appeared to the 12. Then he appeared to all of the disciples at once. Then he appeared to over 500 brethren at one time, and he says these words, most of whom remain until now. When you do the math, you realize that when 1 Corinthians was written, there were over 300 eyewitnesses, at least, of the resurrection of Jesus Christ who were still alive during that time.
Oh, so we're doing the thing about Paul's 500 eyewitnesses, huh? Look, Voddie, I don't believe for one moment that you think this is new to me or any other atheist. You know this is old hat, and you probably know it's silly. But it sounds good for your audience, and your audience supports your lifestyle. Fair enough. But to everybody else listening, this is a really dumb argument. For those not already familiar with it, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15:6 that over 500 people witnessed the resurrection of Jesus, and that most of them were still living at that time. But the first thing I would ask is, so what? This isn't eyewitness testimony by any stretch of the imagination. This is a church leader, who's in the middle of trying to convince people that Jesus rose from the dead, by the way, claiming that 500 people saw the resurrected Jesus. And this is a really easy thing to do. See, I just wrote on this paper towel that 500 people saw me beat up Bruce Lee. Does that mean that there are 500 eyewitnesses to this event? No, it just means that I wrote down that 500 eyewitnesses saw it. So can we put this stupid f***ing thing to bed already? But Prophet Azad, Paul said that most of them were still living at that time, so that means he couldn't be lying because people could go talk to the witnesses. Well, no, this is absolutely not the case. First, let's point out the obvious fact that he doesn't name these witnesses. He names a few church leaders, who we could assume would be complicit in backing up his story, but the 500 are totally anonymous. Second, let's remember who Paul was talking to. He was speaking to the Corinthians, who live here, about supposed eyewitnesses who live here in Jerusalem. So if you were a member of the Corinthian church and you wanted to check Paul's story, you would have had to travel all the way from here to here in an age when travel was time-consuming, dangerous, and difficult, then somehow find out who these eyewitnesses were, locate them, and ask them questions about something that happened 20 years earlier. If these witnesses simply didn't exist, how would you ever know it? If someone told you an unconvincing story, how would you know you hadn't just found a liar or a crazy old crank and that there were still better eyewitnesses out there? And if, through some extraordinary journalistic effort aided by incredible luck, you managed to determine Paul's eyewitnesses didn't exist, then what? Would you bring your story back to the church community in Corinth and tell everybody Paul was wrong? How do you think that would go over? How successful do you think you'd be pitting your word against that of charismatic leaders like Paul, especially if you were just shitting on a popular story in front of an audience of Christians? I think it's clear that Paul's claim of eyewitnesses, even given the generous assumption that the English words we read on the page really were written in the same form by Paul, doesn't prove anything about Jesus rising from the dead. There's a final thing I want to get across here, and that's an appreciation for what it means to ask somebody about something they saw 20 years ago. Imagine trying to recall something you saw in the 1990s, even something as dramatic as the O.J. Simpson verdict. How clearly do you remember the specifics? How sure are you that your mind hasn't altered or even made up details based on biases, expectations, or things you've heard from other people? And this is living in a time when our collective memories are reinforced by a massive library of video footage and print media. As bad as our memories can be, I don't think we fully appreciate how much technology keeps our minds in check. So just try to imagine living in a mostly illiterate society where you have one fleeting chance to witness something with your eyes. You don't see a news recap the next day. There isn't a body of newspapers and magazines reminding you of the details. You can't go online to fact-check all the little specifics that drift in and out of your wandering mind. All you have is what's inside your head, along with things you and others pass to each other by word of mouth, much of it based on gossip and conversational one-upsmanship. Within your social circle, anything you or others say that's interesting or reinforces the group's values is rewarded with status and goodwill. Boring fact-checking questions or anything that poo-poos the group narrative is punished with scorn, disinterest, and even varying degrees of ostracism. Within an environment like this, practically any story would be suspect within weeks. After a matter of years or possibly even months, you would expect most word-of-mouth accounts to be thoroughly riddled with legend, to the extent that false rumors of a resurrected man would not be out of the question. The curious thing is, Christians are familiar with this phenomenon, and they use it to account for everything from other religions to tales of mass UFO sightings. But of course they have one ace in the hole reason Christianity is different, right? And that's the massive textual evidence attesting to the life and death of Jesus. See, according to Christian apologists, if I hired a bunch of people to copy this onto other paper towels, then that means I probably beat up Bruce Lee. But that's a topic for the next video.